American religious movements, self-help, and in particular, the prosperity gospel. After being unexpectedly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at the age of 35, she wrote a New York Times bestselling memoir, Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies That I've Loved, which tells the story of her struggle to understand the personal and intellectual dimensions of that American belief that all tragedies are just tests of character. Her TED Talk on the subject has received over 6 million views to date, and her popular podcast, Everything Happens, involves her talking with folks about what they've learned in dark times and why it's so difficult to speak frankly about suffering. Her second memoir, her new book, is out now. It's called No Cure for Being Human. Kate, welcome to Christchurch, Charlotte.
Oh my goodness, this is so fun. I've really been looking forward to it.
Well, I'm just so glad we get a chance to talk. I thought it would be good here at the beginning to kind of lean on your academic field of study. Can you tell us a bit about the prosperity gospel? You wrote a book called
Oh my gosh. You're like, and I have many props.
I feel like Vanna White. Should I bring them all? Okay. You wrote a book called Blessed, which is a history of the American prosperity gospel. And so can you just tell us, what is the prosperity gospel?
Sure. It's the belief that if you have a certain kind of faith, that God will give you health and wealth and happiness and family togetherness and everything your heart desires. And the asterisk you can hear then in my voice is then the little phrase, a certain kind of faith. So they believe that if you so it's a movement that really came out of the late 19th century, which had a series of coalescing ideas about the power of the mind. So what it imagined was that the most important thing about us spiritually is our minds. That yes, we're hearts and bodies and blah, 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 but we are mostly thought incubators. That if we can create the right kinds of thoughts, we can imagine them or there's like, they have like visualization practices or like mantras, short phrases, small prayers. And then if you speak them out loud, that just like God says, let there be light, and there is light. So too believers have the ability to speak our words into reality and make them so. So yeah, the prosperity gospel movement really rests on a certain account of every believer's power to create their own spiritual reality.
Yeah. And I can already hear the downside of that being, if your spirituality is awful,
yeah,
it's kind of on you.
It makes every word, good or bad, or thought like a boomerang, something that goes out and then has to come back to you. And it is kind of a double, like the double arrow of it. The moving forward is that then if you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed or that you need something to change in your life, it gives you an experience of tremendous agency, like capacity to change your experience. But just as you said, if you have a life that's unsolvable, if you have something that can't be undone, unsaid, you've got a tragedy and not just an inconvenience, then that means that the same logic applies, that you must have put bad things out into the universe that are coming back around to find you again.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, so at Christchurch, we're exploring the power of hope. We're using three we love alliteration, 3 P's to understand hope. And it's prayer, process, and then possibilities. So it sounds like in the prosperity gospel, if you just say the right prayer, then the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, they could do that version in a different way. They could say prayer as in it's in like the history of this movement that develops it, which is called New Thought. We call this version of prayer mental magic. The idea that you can make your mind sort of recite a formula that then makes it come to be. So you could have prayer as a formula. You could have process. Oh my gosh, I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of prosperity sermons about the process of waiting for your faith to become reality. I remember one where the pastor described it like you're going through a fast food line. Like you put your order in at the at the window, and then then they have to make your order. And then the more specific you are, the more time it's going to take. So give it a minute. And then on the other end, you get what you wanted, which for me is always just the 2 cheeseburgers meal, which is a classic. But that the process is they've got all kinds of spiritual language for seed faith or believing God for, as in you just have to wait until it happens. And then the third would be a different version of what you're describing, possibilities well, and I wouldn't say possibilities, I would say certainties that everything that you hope for will come true. So it definitely it strips any mystery out of the Christian faith. It must be so because you have prayed it and because God is good. That's the logic.
Yeah. This is a little cynical, but the first thought that comes to mind is how many times my order's been wrong at Taco Bell. When I got up there and opened the bag.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, we need to talk about you going to Taco Bell, but that can be part of a private intervention later. But yeah, it doesn't account for things that are obviously mistakes, things that surprise us. What if, like, I spent, gosh, all of my 20s going to prosperity mega churches and interviewing televangelists and going to especially faith healing services. So I'm sitting beside people in wheelchairs who are praying to be fully healed. And in those moments, they're imagining, I already said the formulas. Now I just have to be faithful in the waiting. But that so much of the work isn't just like waiting. It's you have to keep yourself in like a state of endless vigilance, which is really emotionally exhausting, because what it always imagines is God has already given it to you. They describe it sometimes like if you have a check written to you, but you just won't take it to the bank. Like it's already there, but you're not depositing it. And it does create a feeling that that the responsibility of life is always on your shoulders, and you just haven't managed to really like live into the promises of God.
Okay. So now the pivot. You're in this milieu, you're studying prosperity gospel, you're sitting through all these sermons, and at 35, you get the tragedy, you get the big diagnosis.
Yeah, I had a life that I had some very wonderfully expensive hopes that I was waiting to pay off. I went into academia, which is truly the most wonderful and the dumbest profession in the whole world. I love it. But it takes about a decade for you of paying into a series of systems for you to really get the life you hope for. And I imagined that at my early 30s, I had like finally gotten a PhD and gotten my first job. After a lot of infertility and miscarriages, I finally had this like squishy, gorgeous baby with like giant frog eyes. And I had for a minute the life I really wanted. And so I remember all this. I remember I was driving in the car with these 2 prosperity church ladies, and they kind of were like, we've been waiting to talk to you about this. And they were like, Kate, like, don't you kind of feel that like, things are finally working for you? Like you're finally starting to, they were saying like in a loving way, you're finally starting to make the prosperity gospel work for you. And every now and then it feels like that. Like we've gotten the life that we may accidentally wonder if we deserved. And then out of the blue, I've had no cancer in my family, not a hint of any reason to think that I would be the one suddenly with stage 4 colon cancer, and that I was supposed to die that year. Within a couple of days, they said I had a 14% chance of surviving, and surviving meant 2 years, but that it was September and that I would likely die in June. And I really, I was all the things you imagine you might feel, where you're scared and angry, but I was something a little closer to horrified that a life that I thought that I had built suddenly may be for nothing. And I remember thinking, like, God, are you serious? Like, I have been I know no one's supposed to say that they're a good Christian, but like, have I not kind of been a good Christian. Like I have been, kind and reasonable and faithful, and like my life is the one that explodes. And I think that was the beginning of a kind of long exploration of like under just being humbled by the fact that maybe I had a prosperity gospel that I had really believed in. And maybe I had hoped that my faith and my Christianity was going to make my life less painful, which I now no longer believe to be one of God's promises.
Yeah. It's so fascinating how because I almost said at the beginning, can you explain the prosperity gospel? Because we're good Episcopalians and that's like not really our thing. But what you just named is so interesting that actually, and I think we can get into this, but it's part of our kind of American idea too.
Yeah.
It does get in because my dad got diagnosed with cancer in seminary, and my prayer sounded like your prayer. I mean, I remember saying, we're thinking, God, I did the whole system.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Yeah.
like, what's going on?
Yeah. This was a very time consuming hobby if it was just a hobby, God. Like, yeah. And I mean, Episcopalians are always my favorite. They are denominationally the wealthiest of all Christian denominations. This is part of, I think, the mainline, do I have a prosperity gospel question we sometimes have is sometimes we accidentally embody it in the beauty of our buildings and the comfort of our lives, and this sort of the implicit expectation that our life is going to be a series of small satisfied hungers, like, oh, and then we can challenge ourselves, and I know the pandemic has taken apart a lot of those assumptions and showed our lives to be much more fragile than we imagined. But it is very easy when our lives look beautiful and ordered to imagine that they are as ordered as we hope they are.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, it fits with your story, but the illusion of the prosperity gospel and just kind of the American dream as a whole is that everything looks great. Things are going wonderfully. What could be wrong? But I think we know things are kind of crumbling. I think in your new book, you talk about the seams of the universe being torn apart.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening.
It does. I mean, the American dream tells us a story of if we think of we live in a closed universe where there's always, we live in an open universe in which there's always more. And so there's not a limited economy. There's not that there's always more for the right kind of person, the righteous, hardworking individual who knows how to put their dreams and hard work into reality. And when you live in a tragedy or a pandemic or something that comes apart, you realize that we have often kind of a closed world in which we have finite resources, and you only have like a couple super clutch friends, and that you need the day to be much more of a miracle than you thought, which is frankly what the church has been to me. Is it does feel, gosh, the church, that is like a prosperity gospel that I truly believe in. And by that, I mean where there's more and more without any good logic to it, where the church has fed me, driven me to the medical appointments I needed when I had to fly to Atlanta, helped pay for plane tickets I couldn't afford, worked to rescue my family from medical bankruptcy when my illness was then going to cost my family hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, the church is the reason why it's so ridiculous and so wonderful. It's just like all the rabbits, out of every hat and all the scarves out of every sleeve, is like, we have a belief that when we abandon individualism, that we are somehow more.
Yeah. And I mean, not to get too hokey with it, but it turns out that wealth is not the Ferrari. It's actually Miss Betsy's bread on the front porch.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. For me, it's always like, so I don't have family here in the United States because I am an immigrant. And I think you can only tell when I say things like sorry. Um, but yeah, for me, it was like Roger, my librarian, who also went to the church that I go to, and just showed up at 4 a.m. to take me to the airport. And maybe because he didn't want to hear me talk, but he was like, "You don't have to talk." and, and I just, when I think of the people who carry us, I think of those people in the church.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, so you've talked a bit about the American dream, and you've broadened from prosperity gospel to self-help in general as your field of study. And I wonder, this is kind of a very selfish personal question. Why is self-help so attractive? Why do I
Yeah.
keep buying these books?
Yes, exactly. Well, you keep buying these books, Pastor, comma, because it's the dominant American genre, is because that's the cheap paperbacks that's being put in front of you at every airport and every Costco next to the freezer section, is because this was a genre that is so powerful that by the mid 80s the New York Times had to make a separate category for them so any other book had a fighting chance. It is abstracted, universalizing principles. It's attempt. I mean, in a charitable version, we could call it practical wisdom. In a more uh, honest assessment, I think we could say that it attempts to make, like when you said, I did the whole system. It's exactly right. It attempts to take our experience of the world and render it into a system in which it will always make you a winner. And there's a million reasons why we always need advice. But self-help promises not just advice, it promises us a solution to the problem of pain. And that is why it is a joyful delusion.
Yeah, and it's that same prosperity, like prayer process possibilities, that if I could just hustle a little harder,
Yeah.
wake up a little earlier, do a little more.
Yeah, I've been meaning to tell you about your morning routine. I've been talking to your loved ones, and I just feel like you could maximize your mornings. There's a whole cluster of sort of interlocking promises that make us feel like we are always on the verge of getting what we want if we could just try. And it could be it's fully is absorbed into all business literature, in which you need to get to the bottom of your inbox, and you need to streamline your processes, and you need to, so that's like the gospel of efficiency and pragmatism. Then there's the entire health and wellness industry, which is there to tell you that Dr. Oz is really wants to explain to you how your gut health is just about to help you unlock your unlimited life. And smoothies and supplements, and there's always a solution to the problem of being a body, and then there's always a solution to the problem of your relationships. If you could just have more emotional health and agility, and in every version, the the assumption is always more, that we could do this forever, that we're never going to find the end of ourselves or our days. So I find that the thing that's most overwhelming about them is, while they're wonderful for little bits of agency, that feeling of trying, they don't help me grapple with finitude, with the inherent ends that are always in front of us. So what happens when, like if we're having befores and afters, what happens if before was better?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, in kind of taking down the insidious prosperity gospel. I mean, you've been fighting the good fight. You wrote a book, spreading the word. But I wonder if you can tell us about a little walk you went on in the hospital after your surgery, down to the gift shop to kind of do your moral duty.
I feel like I need to explain to you that I'm just like normally a very nice person. And I'd written like my history of the prosperity gospel is very gentle. And normally I was just kind of, I thought, a compassionate observer. And but then I was fresh from my diagnosis, and they really don't let you go home unless you can walk without falling over. Super picky. So I at first it was just to the door and back, and then I was allowed to go up and down the hallway. But one time I found the elevator, and then I just I took my IV pole downstairs and was just kind of wandering around, and found the hospital gift shop, and I saw this enormous display of Joel Osteen, televangelist Joel Osteen, largest church in America, Joel Osteen, Best Life Now books. They're all the same. Best Life Now, Every Day of Friday, You Can, You Will. And they're all the same in terms of if you speak positive words, you will have health and wealth and happiness. And I just absolutely lost my mind. I just went in and decided that I would helpfully take apart the display. That so I just like started taking the books down and then putting them on the floor. I thought helpfully, and I my intent when I think back was to take all the books that I knew were prosperity books and just remove them, like put them to one side. And then this poor bookstore manager comes out and was like, "Ma'am," so I was like a hostage scenario where I was like, I promise I'm not just some random person. I work here at Duke University as a professor. I am an expert in this, and you can't sell this to me. And I said it with so much heat. And I was trying to explain to her that these books actively blamed people for their own diseases. And my assumption was that I would come up with, I did leave her with a long list of, I thought, new and helpful suggestions. But when I came back the next day, it had been reassembled very, very carefully.
I mean, that's again, that insidious nature of this prosperity gospel is, I mean, it shows up in, you've talked before about the cultural scripts you're handed when you get a diagnosis like this. But again, it shows up, I imagine everyone who gave you advice or wrote you a card or anything, they're all well-meaning. And they probably wouldn't say, well, I want to give her the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
But I would imagine you just got the kind of endless cultural script stuff that sick people get.
Yeah.
They laid it all at your feet.
People reach for the things that their culture gives them. And that's partly why I'm so intellectually and emotionally and spiritually invested in talking about these cultural formulas and these cultural cliches, because there are so many that are directly are deeply painful to suffering people and make it harder and harder for people to get the kind of spiritual support that they need. So there's yeah, I mean, there's a couple of categories we get. Do you mind if I talk about the Christian ones in particular? Because those ones feel like they
yes,
are like lasers in my soft heart. I think part of it is because there's this sort of just general teaching, and I recently saw a documentary about Netflix and on Netflix, and the answer is sugar or red dye 40 or and then there's of course all kinds of minimizing any sentence that begins with at least you're at a great hospital, at least you had a son. I got a lot of that, but the ones that were related to faith felt especially painful because the categories weren't wrong. People were saying things like that heaven will be beautiful, and that and a lot of God has a plan, which is to say, we need to believe in some way in the sovereignty of God. The problem was assuming that there was any kind of math that was going to add up to make my life feel like enough. So when people said things like God needed an angel, which is, as we know, theologically incorrect because God doesn't make deceased people into angels, it was trying to explain how the future would make the present bearable. And it's just not true. I mean, heaven will be wonderful, and God is drawing all people toward a story of the salvation of the world. But that's not the same thing as telling a suffering person that their Christian hope, since we're talking about hope, is going to make their child growing up without a parent less unbearable. And so I think the idea that our faith will teach us lessons that make this all okay. It felt like a kind of lie that only faithful people told me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder, that's a good place to kind of stop on what actually is Christian hope then. Like what are we talking about
Yeah.
when we talk about hope? And
Yeah.
I've referred to it more as like the gritty hope, or I think in your
Yeah.
book you talk about a prayer being, Lord, let me see the world as it is. Um, and
Yeah.
that kind of connects with that gritty, kind of fire tempered hope. Um,
Yes. Yeah, I guess that's the place where I guess the two things that I needed for hope. I didn't just need hope to be real. I needed also to be able to talk about courage. That to face the world as it is, we need courage, so much more courage than I imagined. That in the face of not enoughness and fear and uncertainty, we do, as people of faith, need to have a very thick account of courage, but not just courage, because God has placed a future before us. God has dropped an anchor somewhere and is pulling us toward it. And there will be a time when we will not be separated, and there will be no more tears, and there will be no oncology or suicide or brokenness um, of any kind. And that kind of wholeness is God's absolute rock solid promise that this is not the end. That to me, it took me a bit to try to even use the word hope, because I think I had gotten it confused with is that the same thing as saying that my life is going to work out? And I remember I was in the hallway and I was talking to Warren Smith, who I just adore, and he's a professor at the Divinity School, and he always has very earnest and loving accounts of virtue and the Christian life. And I was like, Warren, why do I need hope as a Christian? Why can't I just have courage? Like, it feels a little more honest to just try to live in the present as much as I can. And he was like, oh, Kate, but as Christians, we have to be people of hope, which is to say we have to account for the world that is not yet, and also know that there's a world that will be. And that is the story of God's great love for us. So I was like, fine, screw you. I don't really.
Pass. Yeah. Yeah. That's the danger in the Christian hope, is reducing it to that kind of prosperity, like wishful thinking. Yeah. And
Yeah.
what I kept coming back to in reading your new book is the idea of limits.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosperity gospel and the American dream want us to believe we live in a limitless world, that we are limitless, that the world is limitless.
Yeah. Yes.
And it seems like in the gospels, it's actually all about limits, and accepting the limits we've been given.
Oh my gosh, yes. I want to say two things about what we are promised. But the first is something that I just heard from, Jerry Sitzer. He's a professor at Whitworth College, and he had this book that was very famous as an account for grief that came out about 20 years ago. It's called something like A Grace Disguised, I think. And he has a really difficult story where he lost his mom and his wife and his child in the same car accident. And so he was a kind of like walking tragedy for so many people. And every time people looked at him, they felt the unfairness of the world. And so we were having this conversation about that there's no clean formula for, he's like, Kate, if I had sneezed at the stop sign before, like it never would have happened. And because of that, like there's so much in life that you cannot make sense of, but you only have to carry. And I've learned to carry that differently, but it's not to say that it's not painful. And he's wonderful and I adore him. But he said, but I think I but when I say like there's no cure for being human, or there's we must account for our limits, I guess in the back of my mind I was like, yes, but if I was miraculously healed, wouldn't that be really great? And, and I pray for healing and I believe in miracles and that kind of thing. And he was like, yeah, but, and no one said, no Christian has ever said yeah but to that before. And he was like, yeah, but the dirty little secret about miracles is that they're only temporary. And I was like, oh, oh. He's like, even Lazarus dies again. And it was such a powerful thing to say about living in the not yet, is that, yeah, we have to, even if our wildest dreams came true, we would still have to account for our ends until the day that it will be the only limitlessness is God. And I thought that was a truly horrible thing to say, to say to me. I, but I thought it was wildly true.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think. I love kind of doing the thought experiment about what day 2 was like for Lazarus. Like he's been resurrected. He's like smelling his body's been decomposing. So that's something he's going to have to deal with. But then he just, I guess, goes to work.
What's his job? What's his job? What's his social life like?
Yeah.
How do you live in the life after a before and after is so interesting, because we are changed, and just knowing that we are changed is a hard reality.
Well, that's where, so I guess you're kind of you're in a bit of the after. I mean, your story obviously isn't finished, but you weren't supposed to make it past June.
Yeah.
And that
and now
was,
it was 6 years ago, and I had about 2 years of very, very complicated, difficult medical treatment, where at this point I think I'm on my 9th belly button. I've had so many abdominal surgeries, and then it's been an ongoing kind of bumpy road with my health. And that has been, I guess that was partly why I've really wanted to study those kinds of cultural formulas that try to promise us a limitless life, because I've been living with life as a chronic condition, and just trying to have a higher tolerance and a thicker spiritual language for uncertainty, without pivoting to maybe some of the more unhelpful things, like saying, well, all fear is bad and therefore I'm not, I can't experience fear. Well, my life is actually really scary. So I do need to have a Christian account for the place of fear. And because I think if we didn't, if we didn't need courage to live, we wouldn't need hope. We would just, everything would already be buttoned up.
yeah, I wonder, so there's a line from a poem by David White that I have to think about a lot, because as I've disclosed now in front of you and everyone, I love the idea that I could optimize myself into perfection. I could, if I could just like master my schedule or my email or whatever, I'd be copacetic. But David White has this line where he says, "Give up all the other worlds except the one to which you exist." Mm-hmm. Give up all the other worlds except the one to which you exist. So that idea of the Christian hope is not an escape plan. It's not, we're going to get in our rocket ships and blast off to, heaven and everything's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's, we're on this earth, and people get sick and things happen. And sometimes it's really, really awful.
Yeah.
And the story is redemptive. The long arc of the story is redemptive.
Yeah. That this is a story about love. It's a story about God's love for us, Jesus's endless saving of our lives, and the fact that we we need to love each other because interdependence is required. We are, it will be unbearable without one another.
Yeah. And I didn't intend for this to be just a conversation about Lazarus, but back to Lazarus. It makes me think of when Jesus arrives and Lazarus is dead and Mary and Martha are pissed, rightfully so, because he's Jesus and he could have done something. And he doesn't offer them any condolences. He doesn't say like, oh, get it together. I'm here. Everything's fine. He weeps. Mm-hmm. His response to them is love and connection with the grieving people in the pain. Yeah. And not kind of snapping fingers and saying, oh, cheer up.
The comfort we can find in a suffering God, it's so different than, so right now there's like a cultural resurgence of interest in stoicism, especially for dudes, and especially for business leaders and dudes is like a whole, and it's because they have an account of the need for courage, right? To accept the world and to live with the unfinished nature of our hopes and dreams. But the Stoic God would never cry. The Stoic God doesn't bleed and feel the alienation that this world creates in us. It doesn't have the loneliness that we have, in which we long for God and for each other. And I think it's partly our finitude that makes us need, it makes us need this whole thing in the first place. If we weren't delicate, if we weren't put together by such soft, very sometimes shoddy material, we would have a very different experience of our perpetuity, of our durability. And instead we're like little baby birds with hollow bones and at all times. And I find it really comforting when we know that Jesus knows that too.
Well, I wonder, now that you're 6 years kind of post-diagnosis, I wonder what hope is for you right now. Like, what are you in your life kind of hoping for, and the possibilities that are laid out in front of you? How has that changed since your diagnosis?
Yeah, I'm very, so before, like most people, I imagine, I had a kind of aggressive futurism. Like there was always plans. There was always a casualness with which I talked about retirement or, another kid, or all the things that we just kind of imagine our lives will get filled with. And I don't do that at all anymore. And that is because the future has been a kind of casualty of facing death earlier than I would have liked. But I have a more limited account of the future, but I try to keep it in that like proximate horizon. And it's a good place, because in that hope, I feel like, because I understand my own fragility more, I do feel more cracked open to the pain and the suffering of others. I do kind of feel like it's a miracle when I see people get through the day. So I do think having a slightly less unlimited vision of a future allows me to freight the present with I hope crisper, more realistic categories of what we need. And then but then I'm also very good on seasons, because I think we're just given seasons where we have moments where we feel the wind in our sails, and we get a chance to try and to serve and to be a little more durable. And so my hope is in God's future, and I'm better at the present than I was before. It's got a lot more fun in it than previous iterations of Kate.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, so you talk a bit about the present in your book. So there is a difference between being present as it is told to sick people or suffering people, and I don't know, just being present to your actual life.
Yeah, that beautiful quote you gave about like surrendering possible worlds. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think just be present is absolutely mindset. It's another return to the mindset framework where if you just constrict your mental work, then you'll be able to pour all the weight of a future and a past into now, and then that will add up to enough. And we know that that's not true. I mean, for people closer to the end of their lives, they need the past. We all need the past for like the little, I mean, when I think about the past, like not just the pain of it, but those little beautiful breadcrumbs that showed me where God was there. I get to think, thank God, those things are already mine. Like what a gift, you know? And then when I think about the future, which feels a little fuzzy, then I get to know that God is there, already there, just like God was already in the past. And it does help, I think, sandwich the middle a little more um, with with a little more beauty, a little less arrogance. I think that this is, you know, that every day is gonna, bear up the weight of all meaning. But it does mean that I feel the responsibility of the day because something beautiful is always going to happen. It just, sometimes big, but usually like the smell of my son's hair or the fact that he still calls the bed the snuggle zone, which just slays me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so beautiful. And it's the like boring, mundane stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love, so you, in your book, you're reflecting on being so far post diagnosis, being in time you didn't think you had at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. And you're trying to wrestle with that Lazarus question. Like, I just stood on the brink and now I'm paying my taxes.
Yeah.
Um, like, how do I make
Yeah.
do? You have a friend who says, there's no such thing as a finished life, um, which I think fits well with what we're saying, that
Yeah.
the kind of idea that there's a finish line in the future, that once I just crossed that, I mean,
Yes.
it's that meme you've probably seen, that adulthood is just saying, this week's really busy, but next week's going to slow down for the rest of your life until you die.
That's right. That's so funny.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
instead it's the smell of your son's head, and
Mhm.
um, it's those moments in the midst of the mundane.
Yeah. It's when you're not just having minutes, you get moments. And they can't all be moments. I really know that. But knowing that there will always be some scattered around in your 24 hours is part. And that's something I learned from the Pentecostals, honestly, from the prosperity gospel, is I learned that their sense of God's possibility offered a bigger account of transcendence than I was looking out for, and that now I can see.
Yeah. Well, we're nearing the end. I mean, like, ultimately, yes, but
You're like, you've got a whole sandwich board. The end is coming.
yes, we're nearing the end. Everyone get ready. So I wonder if you could say something. I'm going to do a little projection and say that there might be people sitting in our auditorium or watching on the live stream who are getting through a pandemic. That's
Yeah.
all of us, who have lost people or jobs or um, things that they thought they couldn't live without.
Yeah.
And they're in the place kind of wondering, like, what do I do? Where I don't have hope yet. I don't have any of this. I know you're an academic, but you're a pastor and you're writing and all you do. I wonder what you would say to that person.
I think part of the language that we're fishing around for so often is that around precarity, this feeling delicate, and part of feeling delicate means that our fears can be it can it can be very difficult to acknowledge our precarity without feeling overwhelmed by what can never be. And so I think that first, just locating ourselves on a spectrum of like durable to fragile, just knowing where you are. Maybe you've had other seasons, you will have other seasons, but the one you're in right now, where is that? And then based on how delicate you're feeling, What then, if we're not trying to say that everything is possible, but we don't want to say that nothing is possible, how can we live into the prayer, God, what is possible today? And for many of us, that is going to mean that if we're on the more delicate side, maybe courage for us means that we have to ask for more help than our dignity prefers. Maybe we don't actually have the people in our lives that we need, and it's time to start thinking about making some new friends, because sometimes the friend who's great in a crisis is not good for the season that you're in right now. Maybe um, maybe a more love and compassion toward how uncertain things are means that you need to maybe right size your fears with the reality you're living in, knowing that fear can help you stay awake to your love, and that it is okay if you're angry because it must have been infuriating, or sad because it must have been tragic. So giving ourselves, I think, like more spiritual colors in our rainbow than just kind of imagining that God is crowded over on the sunshiny ones. I think if we do that as Christians, we'll give ourselves a greater aperture to see the light in the dark, and a little more possibility to then ask what is possible.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, one thing you do on your podcast, which I love, is you end with a blessing.
Yeah.
And so I would just love if one of the last things we do here is, can you bless us, all of us virtually gathered?
Yeah.
I'm told blessings work virtually.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're like, I don't know mechanically, but I do know
Yeah.
that turns out God's everywhere. So yeah, I picked
I've read that somewhere.
I picked a blessing that's a blessing for when you just need to put one foot in front of the other, if that's all right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Oh God, the thought of trying for a new and improved me just makes me tired. I am barely getting anywhere. So draw me closer to a different vision, one that sees that I don't need perfection. I need love. I need freed from the expectation that life should always be better. The everyday stressors, the bills, the pressures, the dependence, the existential fears about the future, and the worries of right now. I am threadbare. Blessed are we, remembering that the world is not ours to shoulder alone. Help us put one foot in front of the other as best we can. God, today, give us the strength to go on. Give us hope to see a future, and give us joy to make it not simply bearable, but beautiful.
Amen.
This was a complete delight. You are just a wonderful person to talk to. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Kate. I'm so glad this worked, and I'm glad that all the people in All Saints Hall that I assume are still there and haven't walked out 10 minutes into our conversation. I know we're all so grateful for you joining us virtually, and I hope to see you again soon.
Love that. So grateful to be with you all. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Bye, Kate.
Bye.